Ever since Shakespeare began being taught in high schools around the world, students have questioned why they even bother trying to read the work. They argue that they shouldn't have to read a story about something that doesn't mean anything to them, written by a guy who died too long ago for them to even care, in a language that they can barely piece together. As someone who has never enjoyed or been able to understand Shakespeare, I can confidently say that he is extremely important. As much as I want to throw my copy of Hamlet across the room every time I read it, I have come to respect the seemingly impossible words contained within the pages. While students may not think that a guy who sees the ghost of his father and tries to kill his uncle because the ghost told him to is relevant to their lives, what they fail to realize is that Shakespeare writes about the human condition. He writes about revenge, rage, and family. Shakespeare's plays are so much more than their plot. Within the complex language are themes that are very much relevant to everyone everywhere. In Hamlet, for example, there is a reason people have remembered the famous phrase, "to be or not to be." That reason is because it is relatable. Like Hamlet, people every day all over the world question what life is like and whether it is worth living or not. These themes and topics Shakespeare writes about still apply to people today. In Hamlet, Shakespeare writes, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and, by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation, devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep. To sleep, perchance, to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come." Hamlet questions life, death, and the afterlife. He asks whether life is worth living, which is something many feel today. He also questions what happens after we die, a question still unknown to us. The only thing unrelatable about Shakespearean literature is the fact that it was written 400 years ago. It still has the same relevance today as it did when Shakespeare first picked up his pen. The themes he writes about are timeless and universal. Anyone, anywhere goes through the same emotions as its characters. Everyone has felt Romeo's passion and Hamlet's rage, the only difference being the circumstances. I'm sure that most of us haven't fallen in love and gotten married and then committed suicide to be with the love of our lives all in a matter of days. And I'm also sure that none of us have killed our uncles for stealing our father's throne. But these things only make for a good story. When you dig past all the plot, you can find the hidden lessons and themes within the plays. We can see that Shakespeare doesn't intend to bore us with endless soliloquies. He intends to write about the human condition. People say that since Shakespeare was written so long ago, his work is out of date and irrelevant to us 21st century kids. But this is wildly inaccurate. Dismissing Shakespeare simply because it's too old is the same as dismissing religious literature. If people can find a way to connect the words of the Bible or the Quran to their lives, they can surely connect Shakespeare. If Shakespeare was so relevant, why is it that movies are still based off of his works? For example, The Lion King, which is largely based off of Hamlet. This is a movie we all grew up watching. We learned that it is important to forgive yourself, that running away from your problems doesn't make them go away, and to fight for what you believe in. These lessons can all be pulled from Shakespeare's Hamlet. The only difference is that one is much more difficult to understand. But a good challenge never hurt anyone. Shakespeare is also important to help us understand our own society. For example, when it comes to feminism and how women are treated and viewed in the world, Shakespeare gives us insight into what women's status and views were in Elizabethan times. In Hamlet, Shakespeare writes about Ophelia, Hamlet's love interest, and Gertrude, Hamlet's mother. The way that Shakespeare writes about these two is evidence of the attitude about women of the time. About Ophelia, Shakespeare writes from the point of view of her brother that she should not have premarital sex as she will become unmarriage material. He writes, Fear it, Ophelia, fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affection, out of shot and danger of desire. The chariest maid is prodigal enough if she unmask her beauty to the moon. Virtue itself scapes not calumnious strokes. This shows the view that women were to remain pure. Using this view of women back then, we can compare it to the attitude towards women in today's society to observe social issues including equality. Another quote that shows how inequitable the views towards men and women were back then is, "Believe so much in him that he is young, and with a larger tether may he walk." This shows that back then, men were able to walk around doing whatever they pleased, and women were the ones who needed to be controlled and behave appropriately. This is relevant to today's society, such as the Me Too movement, which involves a discussion about whose responsibility it should be when someone is sexually assaulted. This view that Shakespeare writes about is relevant to this because we can see that in Shakespeare's time, men saw themselves as superior. They thought that they could walk around doing whatever they could because they carried the larger stick. When in fact, now, women are starting to raise questions about this common idea. Therefore, mainly through the use of Hamlet, Shakespeare is extremely relevant in today's society because he writes about themes that are relevant to everyone. His writing is timeless, and he provides insight into what life was like in the Elizabethan era, which can be used to compare to modern-day society.